Hello YouTube, Sidekick here with a first impressions video of the Big Radials Goose module for Microsoft Flight Simulator. So some of you who watch my channel may know that I have a little bit of a weakness for seaplanes and also for planes from the kind of golden era of piston engine flight. So there has already been a Goose that I reviewed on the channel. It was a free module and it was pretty good. But this is a paid module by Big Radials, as I said, and you know, the difference shows. So I thought it was useful to do another video about the Goose. I particularly enjoyed flying this model, and I wanted to take it out for a spin and just tell you a little bit about it. So I'm not going to do a full review, and I'm not going to do the full startup procedure and all those sorts of things. There are some other folks that have done videos on that, and they're very good, so I don't think that I really need to redo it. We're just going to get down the runway here, take it for a little flight, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I think it flies. We're here at Friday Harbor, which a lot of you are probably pretty familiar with, especially if you flew FSX at all. And we're just going to take a quick trip over to the Bedwell Seaplane Base in the Channel Islands in British Columbia. So the developer Big Radials, I think, is an Australian developer, if I'm reading their website right. They've done a few other modules for Microsoft Flight Simulator, including the a P40 and a Neoport 17. Clearly, their philosophy is, I think, best described as nothing fancy, which is something that I really actually enjoy. They want to focus as much as they can, obviously, on the flying, and as little as possible on anything that gets in the way of that. So I like that, and I like this module, and I haven't tried their other modules, but I very well may after my experience with the Goose. So as you can see, we've gotten off the ground after a little bit of a rodeo on the runway. So here's another interesting thing, an example of nothing fancy. The way you check whether or not your gear is up in the Goose is you look through that little window that I just looked through down there on the right to see whether or not the wheels have actually come up. It's a pretty simple system. There's nothing to get in the way of finding out whether or not your wheels are actually in the airplane, so that's pretty neat. So the centerpiece of this airplane, this mod, if you hadn't guessed already just by listening, is the engines, obviously. With a name like Big Radials, how could you expect anything else? And I really do enjoy the engine modeling in this aircraft. I think the engine, I'd like to say that I think the engines are very accurate, but I honestly don't have enough expertise to know that. I can certainly tell you that they're very detailed. The startup procedure definitely, you know, doesn't feel automatic. You feel like you wonder whether or not the engine's going to catch, which certainly is the reputation that Big Radial engines of this time period had. Once they're started, they take a while to warm up, and you do need to let them warm up if you want them to work properly. And the performance at low RPM really does seem to be very accurate as well, as you could hear on the runway there. They really chug when they're all the way down to idle. In fact, you may not want to leave them idling at the lowest possible setting. Once you increase the throttle, it does take a while for the RPMs to build. Even though the manifold pressure goes up right away, it takes a little while until the propellers start spinning faster, which you know, seems to be the way that engines of that day really performed, although I'm not an expert enough to know whether or not this particular performance is realistic, but it feels right to me. You also have to be careful to manage the engines properly. If you allow the manifold pressure to go up too high, above about 35.5 for too long, the engines will start, you will damage the engines and they will start to misbehave. So you do have to keep an eye on that manifold pressure gauge, and in cruise keep it down to 34.5, which isn't difficult, but it is something you want to remember the first time you jump in the aircraft, because it was something I didn't know until I looked at the manual. And then I wondered why after 5 minutes the engines were surging and dying and running away on me, and it turned out it was because I had not been careful enough about managing them. So once you're in cruise here, as you can see, you do have control over propeller speed as well as manifold pressure. Unlike a lot of modern aircraft, it's not sort of a question of you have a takeoff setting and a cruise setting. You do have to sort of manually adjust both to get what seems to be a comfortable cruise. The sound model is very good because, changing the RPMs even a little can have a distinct impact on how the aircraft sounds, and in fact, how comfortable it is to sit in the cockpit. There's certain settings of prop RPM, at least for me, that I really want to avoid because I just don't like the way it sounds, which, again, I think is a nice and probably a realistic touch. So overall, I find sitting in the cockpit feels like I am sitting in an aircraft of the vintage that the Goose is supposed to be. This effect, by the way, is tremendously enhanced if you fly the Goose in VR because of the nature of the cockpit, where you really are surrounded by things. When you fly it in VR, you really do feel like you're sitting in the aircraft. The sound modeling is very immersive. When you turn your head, it changes, and I really enjoy flying this aircraft in VR. So as you can probably tell by now by the looking around the cockpit, you'll see what I mean about the philosophy of Big Radials, of sort of nothing fancy and nothing that gets in the way of flying the aircraft. There are no modern radios or nav equipment, unless you cheat a little bit, and we'll show you that in a sec. There is a little box on the floor that you can open up that will give you access to a GPS unit if you need that. The other interesting thing is it does not have an autopilot, but it does have a gyro pilot, which you enable with this switch here. And what it will basically do, I'm just checking to make sure I'm where I want to be. What it will basically do is it will hold the aircraft at the attitude that it's in when you enable the gyro pilot, and then it will let you use those little dials in the middle of the console to actually change the settings. And in fact, it even has a heading hold function where you can set the heading on that little dial, and then you can actually turn the airplane by changing the heading, which is all pretty neat. But it very much feels like 1940s technology. It's not an autopilot. It's called a gyro pilot, but it does mean that you can fly hands off, and it is pretty stable. Here you can see I'm just fiddling with the dials a little bit. And so you can see that once you get the engines tuned to the right RPM and the right manifold pressure, we're doing about 160 knots here. And it's not an uncomfortable flight. Now, it's taken me, 5 or 10 hours of flying the aircraft to figure out how to set it up so that it's comfortable to fly. And again, I'm not unhappy about that. I think one of the real strengths of this model is that it does take a little while to get to know it, to feel like you're flying it well. And that's something that I appreciate. It's fairly easy to actually get in the aircraft and just fly it, but it does take a little while to figure out how all of the systems work. And again, I don't think that's a problem. I feel like if the aircraft is well modeled, then it is going to take a little bit of time to get used to, because every aircraft should look and feel differently. That's the whole point of having as high fidelity a simulation as we do here. I'm hearing some sounds there, so I'm checking to make sure my gear hasn't gone down on me, and it hasn't. So again, really interesting way of checking that your gear is up, and that's one of the things I really enjoy about this aircraft. The aircraft does come with a thoroughly enjoyable manual, and I mean that. The manual is actually something that is actually quite a lot of fun to read. So I would definitely encourage you to take out the manual. It's not a long read, but you will learn some important things about the aircraft, including, as we'll see when we get on the water, I'll show you where the little secret box on the floor is that gives you access to a few little extras that you may want to deploy at some point. So as you can see, we're flying along here. We've taken off out of Friday Harbor. Now we're beginning our descent into Bedwell Harbor, which is off to the left there. And we're just going to do a circuit around it and pick our landing point. So I've talked a lot about a lot of the details that I really like about this model and why I have been enjoying flying in it. But, how does it fly? And I think that it flies well. I enjoy flying the aircraft. It is definitely, as I said, an aircraft that you need to pay attention to. You need to have your wits about you when you're flying it, at least initially, until you learn its idiosyncrasies. It definitely needs feet on the rudder pedals. With the high wing like this, there is quite a bit of adverse yaw, and if you're not coordinating your turns, then you will not be successful. But overall, Big Radials makes a point of saying that essentially they've tried to build an aircraft that flies by feel The manual doesn't have a lot of numbers in it. It doesn't insist that you fly at certain speeds at certain times. In fact, in terms of flap operating speeds, they basically say just put them down. They'll come down when the airflow will let them. You don't need to worry about maximum speeds for landing gear or flap operation, which is kind of interesting. And they do make a point of saying that you really should go out and try to fly the aircraft by feel. And that has certainly been my experience. For instance, certainly at lower speeds, the aircraft does have a distinctly different feel than it does at cruising speeds, which is exactly what you expect. And the other thing that is interesting is on landing approach, there is a lot of coupling between power and pitch, let's say. It's not an aircraft where you set the pitch and then you adjust the power to move your landing point, like you can especially in a lot of modern jets. So it does really, I don't think there is a standard landing approach where you have to nail an approach speed and then gently vary your power to try and figure out where to land, especially when you're landing on water. Where you don't really have a defined touchdown point a lot of the time. It does give a lot of scope for actually just flying the aircraft by the seat of your pants, which is something that I enjoy doing. In comparison to other aircraft I've flown, obviously the Widgeon is the one to compare to directly. I would say that, the flight model feels a little bit more detailed in the Goose than it does in the Widgeon. I like the Widgeon. But there are points in the flight modeling where the Widgeon kind of feels like, kind of optimistic, like it's not really requiring you to work too hard. The Goose, works well when you get it in its operating environment, but you do have to work to get it there. The flight envelope, it's not small, but you definitely know when you're outside of it. And I appreciate that because it means I need to spend some time in the aircraft, and I get to benefit from feeling like I've developed some competence in actually flying it. And, that's important to me when I'm flying in Flight Simulator. So I'm finding that the Goose is really repaying the time that I spend learning how to fly it. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most about the model. So as you can see, we're just coming around here, flying around. We've got the manifold pressure dialed fairly far back. We still got the RPMs reduced. Once we get well and truly into the end of our download or our base, we'll basically go into landing mode where we will increase the RPMs to maximum, and then we'll start playing with the manifold pressure a little bit more, especially as we drop the flaps. We're probably going to need quite a bit more power. The flaps have two settings, 30 degrees and 60 degrees, and they definitely add a lot of drag, and they also add a lot of nose pitch up. As you can see, it's also a very nice looking model from the outside, and it sounds great from the outside. It's a beautiful aircraft to be flying here in lovely British Columbia. So we're just passing the landing zone. I think I want to land somewhere between those two little points of land there, that little bay. Checking to make sure my landing gear is not down. That would be a bad thing. And again, just losing some speed here because we're still up over 2,000 feet. We need to get down a little bit. Actually, we're up over 3,000 feet. We need to get down a long way. Now I've increased the RPMs back to maximum so you can hear the propeller node change. Again, like I said, the sound modeling I find is very good. We're just watching our landing zone go by there. We're going to go a long way down here. And then we're going to turn around and line ourselves up. Once we get on the water, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the water handling, which is actually another thing. I find it's a fairly pleasant surprise about the Goose. Certainly the one major difference between this model and the free model, whose water handling really just didn't work very well. And I know part of that is Microsoft Flight Simulator water physics is a little bit iffy, but the Goose seems to be doing a fairly good job of working with what it's given. So as you can see, we got flaps down one notch. We're going to put down the last notch as we go around here. And we're going to do a bit of a dog leg base here today. We're putting down the final notch of flaps. And so now she's getting really heavy, and you can see we're losing altitude pretty quickly. We're down 2,000 feet per minute, but that's okay. I want to get down a little low and then level it out as I get closer to the water so that our descent rate is slower as we get down. So we're adding a little bit of power. It's still coming down pretty quickly. Getting ourselves lined up on on the point where we want to touch down. It's one of the other things that I find interesting about the Goose is it is one of the more difficult airplanes that I have encountered in Microsoft Flight Simulator to land on water. Most of the other aircraft that I know land pretty easily on the water. There isn't a lot of bouncing or skipping if you're, careful at all. The Goose actually takes a fairly careful hand to get it on the water without it wanting to bounce up again, which I appreciate. I think that's probably more realistic. Okay, now we need to really bring the power back in, get the descent rate up, or down, I should say. Get us up, and somewhere around here we're going to want to land. We're still just trying to bleed off speed. As I said, if you hit the water too fast, and about there. If you hit the water too fast, you bounce a little bit, like we just did. Not too badly, but again, I think that's probably reasonably realistic performance. So I appreciate trying to learn to get better at that. So now we're on the water, and one of the things you want to do on the water is keep your speed up when you want to taxi. When the aircraft is up on the step, as they say, it's actually pretty responsive to rudder. So if you keep the speed up a little bit when you land, then it's a lot easier than if you let the aircraft settle and then try to turn. So we're settling a little bit here, but you can see we are able to go around the corner, and our ability to make turns is enhanced if you use differential thrust. So the other thing that you want to do is actually jockey the propellers. As you can see, I've got the left-hand engine quite a bit higher than the right, and I got my foot on the right-hand rudder pedal, and we're not coming around badly in a circle here, but you do need some maneuvering room. You're not going to be making tight turns in a tight harbor area with the Goose, but so long as you plan things right, it's probably manageable. And you just need to kind of keep jockeying the engine, because if you if you give it too much power, then you pick up too much speed. So again, it's not one of those things that I'm still learning. It's worth practicing, and it definitely, practice does seem to pay off, and the aircraft does seem to respond in reasonable ways. So again, that's something that I'm really enjoying about the module. Okay, so here's the little cheat. There's a little hinge in the floor there, and you can pick up this little box. And as well as being a GPS unit, it also has a little switch here called Water Assist, or Water Helper. And then that basically gives you effectively a water rudder that makes the aircraft about as responsive as it would be kind of on a taxiway almost. So that's a little bit of a cheat. You still need to be moving, obviously, to get it to work. I'm just getting up a little bit of speed, and it'll show you. See, we can turn very tightly. So if you need it, that water helper is there. But Big Radials has basically made it clear that, the GPS as well as these other things are not really what they expect to be standard equipment. So they're there if you want to use them. Obviously, you can. But if you want to fly it in its more authentic configuration, then you leave that door closed. So we're just motoring over towards the shore here, and we'll just prove that if it wasn't already obvious, we are definitely an amphibian, because we'll be able to pull the aircraft right out of the water when we get to the shore here. So while we're getting ready to do that, I'll just wrap things up. In case it hadn't been obvious, obviously I like the module. It's not available on the Microsoft Store. It's only available on the Big Radials website. I will try and remember to post a link in the description of the video. It's available for 35 Australian dollars, which is about 25 US or 25 euros, and I think that's a pretty good deal for the model that you get. As I said, Big Radials has not concerned themselves with doing a lot of systems modeling. They've stuck to their philosophy of nothing fancy. I think they've modeled the engines well. I think they've modeled the basic flying characteristics of the airplane well, and I think it's a thoroughly enjoyable model to fly, and I'm really glad that I added it to my stable on Microsoft Flight Simulator. As I said, it's not a difficult aircraft to fly, and it isn't a difficult aircraft to learn. There aren't a lot of systems that you need to study, but it does repay the attention that you pay to learning how to fly it well, I think. And that kind of is the sweet spot that I'm looking for in my Microsoft Flight Simulator experience. I'm not sure what you're looking for in yours, but if yours is similar to mine, I think you really will enjoy the Goose. If you do give the Goose a try, or if you have already, feel free to leave a comment below. If you've enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.